How much then were the colonies of Mu, which we will show in the next chapter, to have committed the same sins as Mu, affected by the flood? Although the Torah says that Noah's flood covered the whole world, that is, the whole earth was flooded, the Quran does not say that the flood covered the whole world. Islamic scholars are generally of the view that the flood only affected the evil-doing country or countries. However, as we have just explained, the countries of Mu and Atlantis conquered and colonized large parts of the world, such as modern-day America and Russia. This means that the flood must have affected a large part of the world, if not the whole world. The evidence we will now present shows that the flood affected a large part of the world, if not the whole world. First of all, the Paleolithic age is considered by scientists to be an unimaginably large and unknowable period of time. Although there are dozens of high-tech structures from that period, the scientific community believes that mankind did not develop scientifically in any way during this period. In addition to dozens of ancient megastructures that are very difficult to build even with today's technology, many ancient technological artifacts found in archaeological excavations are confiscated and stored by institutions such as the Smithsonian Institute, as we will show in the following chapters. All these pieces of the puzzle that make the big picture clear as they are unraveled constitute the main theme of the Black Box of the World documentary series. So forget the history of the world that you have been told, full of incomplete and false information. Around 11,000 years BC, scientists realized that a significant and unexpected change had occurred in human life and called this period of domestication and agriculture the Mesolithic, Middle Stone Age. As a result of this unexpected change, many peoples of the world perished, and many great civilizations were left in ruins and abandoned. Some exceptional regions, such as the civilization of Akkad and Sumer, who replaced Mu, were unaffected or only slightly affected, as we will discuss later. But in general, humanity had lost enough technology to be dependent on very primitive tools. Let us now try to present the evidence that this change, which took place in the 10,000 years BC, was the result of the flood. The huge pyramids in South America are likely to be pre-flood structures. Fray Bernardo de Lizana, in his book Historia de Yucatan, chapter 2, states, when the Spaniards arrived in this country, some of the monuments looked as new as if they had been built 20 years ago, but the natives did not live in them. They used them as temples and shrines and sacrificed in them, sometimes men, women, and children. The construction of these structures was very ancient. The archaeologist Augustus Leplongeon also says of the Maya pyramids, these buildings were not built by the present race, nor by their ancestors. According to archaeologists in Mexico, all the buildings with the symbol of the Kukulkan, the feathered serpent, date back 15,000 years or more and were erected during the time of the Khan Snake dynasty. So, the builders of the buildings with the snake symbol had somehow disappeared because the people who replaced them, whose history goes back 2,000 years BC, did not recognize the builders of the pyramids. In addition, when the ancient buildings and pyramids in Mexico and neighboring countries were first discovered, many of them were found in the jungle, buried under layers of soil, run down and abandoned, and then restored to attract tourists. The only reason these structures could be in such a state is because of destruction and flooding. Again, elephant bones have also been found in excavations in North America and Mexico and are said to be more than 12,000 years old. However, at the time of the Incas, whose culture dates back to 1300 BC, there was not a single elephant in South America. In other words, the elephants that existed on the continent 12,000 years ago had disappeared as a result of a major event. In Uxmal, Mexico, the Temple of Sacred Mysteries was erected to commemorate the loss of the Western lands. And this city of Uxmal suffered a catastrophe at the same time as Mu and was abandoned because Le Plongeon found an inscription on the temple walls that read, "This temple is a monument dedicated to the memory of Mu, the Western Land, the birthplace of our sacred mysteries." On the wall of one of the buildings it is written, Uxmal was destroyed 3 times by earthquakes and rebuilt 3 times. Geologists have found conclusive evidence that there was a flood in the area of the Maya, that the seawater covered the area. The common statement of historians who combine all these events with geological information is as follows. The tremors and swells caused by the earthquakes left the Mayan buildings in ruins. The huge waves that followed swept away all life, including the white Maya of Yucatan. The results of these deluge waves can still be seen today as sand, gravel, and small rocks around and between old ruins. Some buildings that were completely destroyed by the tremors are covered with a special layer. After these disasters, which destroyed buildings and wiped out entire populations, left Central America and Yucatan, the country remained uninhabitable for a long time. As soon as the land was fit for human habitation again, people from the surrounding area migrated inland and claimed the land as their own. Again, the jungle that covers the southern part of Yucatan is full of giant ruins. According to indigenous sources, this forest was part of the country beyond, which had been devastated by the waves of the Great Flood and had lost almost all its inhabitants, and its roads had become impassable. At the time of Cortez's conquest of Mexico, an Aztec priest told him the following: "A long time ago, a great flood covered the valley of Mexico and drowned all the people." Confirming the priest's account, these images are of 10,000 years old human bones found underwater in the Mexican territory. William Niven discovered 3 civilizations buried 29 miles north of Mexico City, separated by layers of sand, rock, and gravel. At Lake Titicaca in the Andes and in the ancient city of Tiahuanaco, there is evidence that the city was at sea level when it was first built, but the city is now 15,000 feet above sea level. Ancient man-made stone structures have also been found in Lake Titicaca. This is one of the proofs that some mountains rose after the flood. In the Colorado desert, there are also famous ruins of a great ancient civilization. These ruins are evidence of the habitat of ancient man. The Colorado desert, like Oregon and many other deserts, was a fertile land before the rise of the mountains left it without water. The flood affected this ancient regions as well. Historical remains in Oregon, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico suggest that some civilizations existed in these regions before the mountains rose, before the flood. Giant human head sculptures weighing tons buried in the ground in various parts of the Americas also attest to the flood and pre-flood technology. The famous pyramids of Egypt experienced very similar historical events. Egyptologist Christopher Dunn says that the age of the pyramids is at least 12,000 years old, based on recent general research. In fact, the oldest pyramids in Egypt are the Giza pyramids, and the pyramids built after the Giza pyramids are simple man-made structures, imitations of the Giza pyramids. This is the most important point that people get confused about the Egyptian pyramids. We need to understand these 2 different groups of pyramids, old and new. While the technology of the old pyramids cannot be understood how they were built, how the low-tech new pyramids were built is already described in detail, even in the hieroglyphs inside them. This fact means that the technology that built Giza belonged to a different civilization, and that the technology of this civilization was destroyed by the flood, which we will prove in a moment. In its place, a tribe with much simpler technology remained or came, trying to imitate ancient technology and culture, just like in Mexico. First of all, scientists who examined the time when the oldest lion Sphinx in Egypt was facing the constellation of the lion realized that the Sphinx was facing that direction in 10,500 years BC. That is, it was built at least 12,500 years ago. Archaeologist John Anthony West studied the Sphinx for a long time and found abrasions on the statue caused by rains. So the Sphinx must have been built at the end of the Ice Age, about 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. The monument would have to have been exposed to rains for a very long time for such characteristic marks to appear on the Sphinx. So what were the rains doing in the Sahara Desert that would have eroded a stone monument so heavily? Again, according to the researchers, it was understood that the Giza pyramids were flooded by a great seawater in 10,000 BC as a result of the researches carried out inside the pyramids. In the Osiris shaft inside the Giza pyramid, there is a large puddle of water of unknown origin. It is clear that this water came from a catastrophe. When first entering the pyramid, the researchers stated that they encountered a lot of sea salt between the walls. Again, in the book Earth Epochs by John Jensen, you can find more evidence about the remains of sea creatures around the Giza pyramid and the erosion caused by sea waves. Even whale bones have been found in Africa and other major continents. According to the funny evolutionists, these whales were once able to move on land, and that's why they made it this far. In the light of this information, we can see that the flood clearly affected the Egyptian colony. James Churchward writes, "The Egyptians had carried the culture of Mu to their colony on the banks of the Nile. In my various excavations, I have observed that the culture of Egypt had developed as far back as the ancients. After Mu was destroyed, the country began to degenerate. So, according to Churchward, the flood destroyed the technology available to the Egyptians. The ancient port city of Heraklion, located near Qaitbay in Alexandria, Egypt, was also sunk by earthquakes. Statues and stone blocks weighing about 40 tons show that this harbor was built with similar technology to the Giza pyramids, that is, in the same period as the Giza pyramids. Heraklion was also a large port, and according to ancient records, it was a region where relations with Mu were established. It was known as the gateway to Egypt, and the temples of Amun-Isis were here. The statues of the bull with the sun on its head were the symbol of Mu. In the light of this information, it is understood that the ancient city of Heraklion was also one of the buildings of the Mu period and sunk by earthquakes. According to the ancient Egyptian historian Manetho, King Ptah ruled Egypt for 9,000 years and then handed over the Egyptian kingdom, but his son Ra's rule was interrupted after a short period of 1,000 years because of the flood. This ancient site, thought to be a pyramid in Bosnia on the European continent, is also buried under a large layer of soil and vegetation. The fact that this ancient site in Bosnia is buried and abandoned, and that these ancient structures were built with unknown ancient technology, suggests that they were pre-flood structures. Other ancient megalithic structures, such as menhirs and dolmens on the European continent, which were probably built close to the time of the flood and have survived to the present day, will be shown in the following chapters. But in general, the fact that ancient megalithic structures all over the world are in ruins, abandoned, buried under sands, deserts, waters, forests, and perhaps even under a layer of snow, is evidence that they were all subjected to a great catastrophe at the same time. This great catastrophe may have been the flood, which is described in all cultures. The Uighur pyramids are in a similar situation. An ancient record in a monastery reads, "The capital of the Uighurs, with all its people, was destroyed by a deluge that affected the entire eastern part of the empire and destroyed everything." This ancient record is evidenced by geological events, from the roofs of the capital to the foundations of the ancient Karakota. An entire layer is covered with rocks, pebbles, and sand. This is the result of waterlogging, as recognized by geologists all over the world. Geologically, this flood took place during an ice age in the northern hemisphere. The records say that the entire eastern part of the Uighur Empire including the capital, was wiped out along with all its inhabitants, while nothing happened to the western and southwestern regions. According to Churchward's research, half of the powerful Uighur state disappeared before the sinking of the Mu and the other half after the sinking of the Mu. To prove how deep-rooted civilization in India was, one need only look to the west coast of India, where, on the bed of the Indian Ocean, a few nautical miles from the present coastline, one can see the remains of large, impressive structures submerged underwater. In conclusion, given the scientific evidence, it can be concluded that although the Great Flood affected a large part of the world, it did not inundate all of it. In fact, the Quran says that the ark of the prophet Noah sat in a hilly region. One meaning of the word Judi in the Quran is hilly, high region. It does not mean mountain or summit. The ark did not stop in the highest part of the world, such as Mount Everest.